Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks to Pastor Sam and everybody involved in this fantastic initiative, and for inviting me to come and share my thoughts. So, I have some slides, and the topic I'm going to be speaking to is the church, tax, and governance. And I'm going to try and give some context. Okay, thank you. So the slide is up. I'm going to try and give some context, and then we take it on from there. So I'm going to be looking at governance, the church, and society. Then governance code and global best practice. And then we look at why accountability matters. And then I'll quickly talk about rendering unto Caesar and share my closing thoughts. But before we go into that, I have a simple exercise, and I do hope that technology will work. Okay. All right. So I have this interactive slide, and there's a question I'd like you to answer. And that question is, which of the following best describes your view about regulations? And I've got 4 options. One is, I comply with all laws and regulations, including those that I don't agree with. Option B, I comply with laws and regulations that make sense to me. Option C, I comply if others are complying, but don't need to bother if others don't comply. And D, I do not comply unless under instruction from God to comply. All right, so what you need to do is bring out your phones and go to, just browse www.pollev. Pollev is pollev.com. pollev.com/CFAA. Once you're there, you can skip the introduction. If it asks you to introduce yourself, just skip that. You see the question and you can vote. And we can see the live results on the screen. pollev.com/CFAA. Which of the following best describes your view about regulation? A, I comply with all laws and regulations, including those I don't agree with. B, I comply with laws and regulations that make sense to me. C, I comply if others are complying, but don't need to bother if others don't comply. And D, I do not comply unless under instruction from God to do so. Is anybody able to get to the platform? Okay, because of our time, if it's not working, I'll just move on. But let's give. Yeah, so just skip that if there's a way to skip it. So that was meant for you to introduce yourself in case you want to know who voted, but we're not interested in that. Okay, maybe we'll come back to this at the end. I think it's taking too much time. But I just thought it would be nice to see how people feel in the room with respect to compliance. Okay, some people are able to get in now. It would be nice to see how we feel about regulations and the law. Okay, so we have some votes already in. And don't be influenced by how other people are voting. Be truthful to yourself. Already we have those who comply, regardless of whether they agree or don't agree. And then we have those who comply if the law makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, they don't comply. All right, I think we'll come back to this later on. So far, nobody is waiting for instruction from God before they obey laws and regulations. All right, so governance, the church and society. Governance is a system and processes for managing the overall direction, effectiveness, supervision, and accountability of an organization. And if I want to simplify that, I'll say that governance is simply how you run an organization for sustainability. You're not looking at it for just today, for the next 5 years, and I like what Pastor Sam said, can we have organizations established by Nigerians that will outlive them for generations? That is what sustainability actually means. For people charged with this governance, you have a huge role to play, including avoiding conflict of interest, ensuring that you run the organization in line with the law, promoting ethical culture, and acting in the best interest of all stakeholders. And that would include government, as well as members, as well as the larger society. Churches are institutions and exist for the benefit of society in addition to their primary role of salvation. We say we want to go to heaven, but we also want to live on earth before we go to heaven. Churches are accountable to God, but so is everyone else. There's no debate about that. But the interesting thing is that God doesn't need financial statements to know what churches are doing, right? Because He's God. So therefore, when you do financial reporting, you're doing this to satisfy your other stakeholders beyond God. In fact, when you do the accounts and the accounts are not truthful, God knows already, isn't it? All right. So as public institutions, churches are accountable to the people, and that's a question of facts. So, what I decided to do was to look at the Maslow's hierarchy of need and to go back in time to say, what was our perception of churches then and what it is now? I made a conclusion myself that in the past, then, churches focus more on the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy needs pyramid in terms of meeting the physiological need of people in terms of food, water, shelter, and safety. But for some reasons, church today still meeting the needs of people, but the emphasis has shifted upwards, the pyramid, such that we are focusing more on self-actualization, branding, things to do with perception, political influence, okay? We're still meeting people's need, but the focus is significantly different from what it used to be. My view will be that every single thing on that pyramid is important, and we shouldn't allow the focus on the top to compromise our focus on the bottom. If anything at all, the bottom, to my view, should be our priority. Then governance code and global best practice. What I decided to do also is to look around the world and see, is there anything we're asking us to do in Nigeria that is out of this world? I found nothing. In fact, to the left of the screen, I know it's very tiny, you may not see it, is a live financial statement of a church in Canada. I found that from the UK to the US to Canada to Singapore, churches are being responsible in being accountable to government and also to their people. They publish some of their financial statements on their websites. If you have nothing to hide, you have no reason to hide. Then what I did was to quickly look at what was it that the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria was asking us to do. Okay? The Financial Reporting Council is still well and alive. They were just too aggressive in the way they were introducing codes the other time. And the CEO was removed. We have new CEO, a new CEO, and a new chairman. And those of you who follow that space, they have now introduced or reintroduced a new code for private sector. All right? Which means they are now working as we speak on the code for not-for-profit organizations, including churches. And some of the things they were asking those organizations to do was governance in terms of the board of trustees and separation of roles, things to do with publication of financial statements and tax returns. I know people don't like taxes. Whether they're in church or out of church, they just don't want to pay. Okay, but we started by saying, would you like to comply with the law even if you don't like it? The fact that government is providing little or no social services is not an excuse to evade tax, because two wrongs, they say, do not make a right. Nigeria is our own, and I do believe that we have to fix it together. It will cost you more to build 1 million boreholes for 1 million households than it will for you to pay your taxes, and we provide water centrally. The same thing for running generators and anything else you can think of. Now, around the world, what I did was to look around. And the global best practice is that we actually have codes as well. They're largely voluntary, and they require that you comply or explain why you do not want to comply. Some of the areas normally covered include board governance, conflict of interest, strategic planning, program management, human resource management, financial management and controls, fundraising practices, as well as disclosure and transparency. So I decided to put this into key areas. When you're talking about governance and you look at governing board, what should you be thinking about? Duty of care and prudence. So Madam Awoshika gave the example of most expensive cars with, protocols, like you think it's even a president of a small country that is moving around. Is that we do agree that as a leader, whether in church or elsewhere, we need to provide resources for you to function. But is that the most prudent way to spend the money you have? That's the question we need to answer. Competence. The fact that you have a calling does not mean you have the skills to lead. And if you have the skills to lead, certainly not in all areas. Okay? Even Pastor Sam, that does so well in inspiring so many of us, just told us today that he didn't understand budgeting, right? He was doing budget based on faith. And as I was saying that, I just remember, because I just did an analysis recently for all the states in Nigeria for their budget of 2019. This year we are in. If you haven't thought about it, all the states in Nigeria want to spend 9 trillion naira state budgets. I said, well, let's look at how much they made last year. It turns out all the states in Nigeria made IGR, internally generated revenue, of 1 trillion naira, and they share from Federal Allocation Committee, FAC, 2.5 trillion naira. Altogether, state made 3.5, and guess what? They want to spend 9 trillion. It was a budget based on faith. But that is not how to run an economy. It's even better for a church to have a budget based on faith than for a state. It's completely ridiculous. Because what's going to happen is you're spending, hoping that you get this money and it's not going to come, and you plunge everybody into deficits. Then we have things around the constitution of the organization, governance framework, staying true to the purpose and objective of the church, avoiding conflict of interest, and ensuring accountability. Another core area is day-to-day operations. You must have control over financial matters, internal audit, asset utilization and asset register. What asset do we have? What are we using them for? Are they for the purposes of the church? Dashboard to know what's going on. We run a lot of what we do in churches based on trust. As an accountant, I can tell you for free, trust is one of the most weak or weakest form of internal control, because you're hoping people will do the right thing. Usually, they don't, or sometimes they don't. You need code for staff and volunteers. You need to think about training and capacity development, fundraising. Some of us have the business arm. How do we run that? It's a business, right? Beyond what we do on Sundays and during the week. Compliance, agreements. Again, because we're Christians, sometimes we just go into business relationships without a documented agreement. That is inviting troubles to come. Contract and project management, code compliance, regulatory compliance, illicit financial flows, money laundering. Do we know our donors? I call it KYD. Banks will say KYC. They're knowing customer, but you should know your donors. If somebody brings a large sum of money and you just collect it and you pretend like you don't need to ask questions, you're failing yourself, failing the church, and failing God. Do we need permits to do what we do, including, for example, crusades? Don't take it for granted. I think many religious leaders in Nigeria ride on the back of the fact that they're so influential that if you take them on, even when they're wrong, they'll have the people by their side. And I think that is taking undue advantage of the system. Then we have returns and reporting, registration with CAC. You need to even ensure that your registration with the CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, is the right registration you have done. We have seen recently court judgments saying that a school should pay taxes because when they registered under the wrong part of the comma. Submission and disclosure requirements, financial statements, CAC and Federal Revenue Service, as well as carrying out external audits, credible ones, not the one that you tell the auditors what to write. Why does accountability matter, if it does at all? And I say, well, it's very important because performance is everything, but perception is everything else. You may be doing the right thing. If you're not seen to be doing the right thing, you are failing because you cannot inspire. There's nothing to copy. We want you to be able to influence society positively, even if we assume that, like Madam Awoshika said, that 1 in every 2 is a Christian. Imagine if we inspire them to do the right thing, we'll transform Nigeria overnight. What actions do we currently perform or execute? How do we behave as churches? We organize posh events and programs, expensive lifestyles of church leaders, big and sophisticated church buildings, opacity of finances. We operate based on trust. We have weak internal controls. And sometimes we do not lead by example. Follow what I say, not necessarily what I do. How do society perceive this? There's lack of trust. I work with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, and we conducted a national study, and we're trying to do citizens' perception of the tax system. Spoke to 10,000 adults and 5,000 businesses across all the states in Nigeria and the 6 geopolitical zones. We found out that tax morale is low, which is not surprising. But we asked why, and Nigerians say because they do not trust government. And they trust tax officials even less. We tried to find out whether it would make a difference whether they were Christians or Muslim. And we found out that the behavior of Nigerians is completely indifferent between when they are Christians, unfortunately, and when they are not. They still all do the wrong things. We asked them, do you trust religious leaders and traditional leaders? And a little bit more than government, but the percentage is still very low. Only a small percentage of Nigerians actually trust churches, sadly. Now, we asked them why, and the answer was simple: transparency and accountability. We complain about government today. It's not like they don't provide accounts at all, right? Those accounts are not even robust enough, and we don't trust them. You can then imagine how about churches not providing anything at all. Okay, so the public perceives us as not demonstrating trust. They think churches make a lot of money. I'm sure if you go on the street and ask, maybe figures they will call will be 10 times what you make indeed. They think churches are interested in rich people who have something to give, and that in itself leads to some desperation to want to be recognized. If I have a lot of money to give, maybe I get the front row in church. We are interested in accumulating assets and flaunting prosperity. We celebrate prosperity and less of values. Okay? More of prosperity and less of values. But, like Caesar's wife, to be suspected is just as bad as to be convicted. As a church, we need to ensure that the body of Christ, that we do not give the room for us to be suspected that we're doing or maybe doing the wrong things. Now, I speak to tax specifically. For many people who know me, you say I preach the tax sermon. Rendering unto Caesar, because we know even in the Bible, Jesus Christ said to us, we should render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. So what does it mean in practical terms? I decided to analyze, and I'm sure for the churches that are here, you get a copy of the slides. So at least you start thinking about what is it that you need to do more specifically. I tried to analyze the income streams of churches, and they would normally be made up of majorly donation and gifts, offerings, tithes, fees, rents, subscriptions, royalties, dividend and interest, as well as business income. And then typical expenses would include personnel costs, property development and maintenance, equipment acquisition, adverts, maintenance, programs, sponsorships, utility bills. Some of us spend a lot of money on just running generators to power our infrastructure and the churches, premises, travels, and so on and so forth. So there was no space, so I put ETC to show that it continues. Now, what does the tax law say? Tax exempt transactions. So, to be clear, so we are on the same page. We have the Companies Income Tax Act that exempt churches, not just churches specifically, and I'll read exactly how the wordings are written. It is section 23(1)(c) of CETA. Profits exempt from tax. Say the profits of any company engaged in ecclesiastical, charitable, or educational activities of a public character, insofar as such profits are not derived from a trade or business carried on by such company. See, that sentence or paragraph I just read has a number of conditions. First, what the law exempts is the profit. Profit means you have to show me your income and your expenses. It is not the income of the church that is exempt, it is the profit. There's a presupposition that you submit financial statements. Number two condition, it must be that it's of a public character, which means the purpose and the objectives of the church is for the public, not for the pastor, not for the pastor's family, not for the pastor's friends. And insofar as such profit is not derived from trade or business. So when we set up, when we have a property and we rent it out and collect rent, it's not covered, sir. If we provide consulting, it is not covered, man. Okay? If you have any other activities where we generate money, and there was a case actually in Nigeria so many years ago involving the Methodist Church, and they had a property in Marina, and they were earning rents, and they refused to pay tax. Government said, no, you must pay. So they went to court, all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yes, you should pay tax, because this profit emanates from doing business. Okay. Now, having said that, I also need to point out quickly that by not even paying attention to what the law says and what is it that we need to do, we are also potentially being inefficient financially. You may not be aware, but there's a provision which I know that churches are paying VAT when they do projects. And they have a provision in the law that allows them not to pay. But they're not aware because even the one they were supposed to pay, they did not pay. It is first schedule part 3 of the VAT law. Under zero-rated goods and services, zero-rated means your VAT is at 0%, but if you had paid any VAT before, you can collect it back from government. It says, goods purchased for use in humanitarian donor-funded projects is zero-rated. It should carry 0 VAT, and it defines humanitarian donor-funded projects to include projects undertaken by non-governmental organizations and religious and social clubs or society recognized by law whose activity is not for profit and is in the public interest. We are coming back to public interest. Every single thing we do has to do with public interest, secondary to only making sure that people go to heaven. Then, taxable transactions would include, it's gone too far. All right, so taxable transactions would include when you pay salaries to your staff. They are not exempted from any law. You are supposed to deduct PAYE like a bank would do, like a consulting firm would do, like a manufacturing company would do. What else is taxable? Payment to church leaders and their families are fully liable to tax, including benefits in kind given to church leaders and their families. For example, if the pastor is staying in an accommodation provided by the church, just like if the CEO was staying in accommodation provided by the company. That's what we call benefit in kind taxation. It's small, but you need to do the right thing. Honorarium to ministers, liable to personal income tax. I do a lot of public speaking myself, yes. I know that's a new one. I do a lot of public speaking myself, and I get paid honorarium, and I pay taxes on them. Okay, I declare it in my tax return, and I pay the taxes. I do know a lot of people don't do it, not only pastors. But let's start from knowing what we need to do, right? Let's agree on it so we can figure out the solutions together. Then, of course, business income that you make is fully liable to company income tax, like it would for any organization. When you have contracts with suppliers to do XYZ, okay, including, for example, organizing this event, maybe we already have a service provider that is doing this and we are paying them. You are supposed to pay VAT and deduct withholding tax when you're paying them, right? Okay, so in my role, trying to help government with national tax policy and all of that, I sit on a lot of the committees, and I can tell you, this conversation about churches comes up every single time. You know what government has not figured out? Government is afraid of if they go after churches, how the people would react. Now, the tables are turning. The people that are beginning to ask questions are the people themselves. I just told you about a national study we conducted. Now, if we lose the people because they don't trust us, it's easy for government to come and ask us to do the right thing, and they don't care what the consequences will be. Okay. So, my closing thoughts. Where do we go from here? I think in terms of transparency, governance, and tax, there's a lot you need to do. Even when I speak to business people, I met a billionaire, Nigerian billionaire, a few months ago, out of the country. So we're attending a conference in DC. And the guy came to me and said, Taiwo, I've heard and read you a lot, but we haven't met before. Thank God that you're here. I need you to help me. I said, what's the problem? He said, I make a lot of money and I don't pay taxes and I feel vulnerable and I don't like it. Is there a way you can help me? Just to give you an idea of how rich this person is, this person makes rent from just one property that is $3 million a year. So $3 million a year is about ₦1 billion, one property, and has a lot of other businesses. So the person is not poor. And the first question I ask is, are you willing to do the right thing? I'm not ready, either now or anytime in my lifetime, to put my goodwill and reputation on the line for whatever it takes. And he assured me he's willing to do the right thing. And that includes you give me full disclosure. Don't hide anything. Otherwise, I can't put my brand on it. So he opened up and gave me everything. And, interestingly, when I was done with his property business, he was supposed to pay the right amount of tax. This guy did not pay up to 100 million for 6 years. I just told you on one property, it makes more than £1 billion per annum. For 6 years, I did correction for him. He did not pay up to 100 million for all the 6 years. Because he had not thought about the fact that in the law, there are provisions for you to make all manners of deductions. My wife runs a small business and makes about £1 million a month in revenue. The last time we filed returns, we both agreed the returns ended up in zero tax payable. We both agreed that we should be nice to government and decided that she should pay about 30,000 naira, and that was all we paid. Part of what we did was very simple. I bought her a car just before she started the business about 4 years ago. And I said, well, since your business is an enterprise, you are the same as your business. So this, your car from today on, becomes a business car. What that means is the entire cost of buying that vehicle, I can deduct it legitimately in my tax returns. Whenever she buys fuels, and even my driver knows, the first thing we ask when we get into a fuel station is, do you have receipts? If you don't have receipts, do you have POS? At least I can print it out. You don't have receipts, you don't have POS, we're driving out. Because I need to manage my taxes efficiently. So you find that this thing is not as difficult as it may seem if we plan to do the right thing. I actually believe, and I think this will be generally true, that Nigerians are not bothered about how much money churches make. If it's a church that makes 10 billion per day, Nigerians are not bothered. Nigerians are concerned about how we spend the money. From history, churches have been actually sometimes more powerful than the states. It's not a matter of today. So if, for example, a church makes 300 billion naira in a year, and they give us the accounts, and 98% of it is to the public interest, and in fact, you can stand and say to your congregation, because of you, we have 2,000 kids who have not been able to get education, but they are now in school. Because of you, 2,000 mothers would have died giving birth, but today they are alive. How do you think they will feel? You think they will stop bringing money? They will bring more. So what we are talking about is not only in the interest of the church, it's also in the interest of society at large. Financial statements and good record keeping are good and essential for governance. Tax planning and compliance is important. Use standard templates for those who cannot afford. When we're discussing this issue, the first time they issued the code in my office, we were discussing it, and one of my pastors came and said, can't we help church? I said, we can help them. They can't pay our fees, but we'll try and see whether we can help. So we wrote to churches. Many of them were not even interested. So one of my partners said, these churches we are trying to help, how about where 2 or 3 are gathered? Is that part of it? I said, if it's only 2 or 3 people, God is there, but they can't afford anything. So let's start with the big ones and create structures that we can replicate. So when Pastor Sam called me, I was so excited because this is what I'd always wanted. And I want to be able to partake in helping improve the system. So, plan business and investment for tax efficiency. As part of what you do is treasury management. When you have loose cash that you're not using immediately, it is financially inefficient to keep them in bank under current account or fixed deposits. If you run a private organization, what would you do? You want to maximize the returns. It's a good thing to do. It's not against the principle of the Bible. Trust is a weak form of control. You can trust, but please check. Paying taxes is not always as expensive as you think. Godliness requires compliance with the law and paying taxes. Build a robust internal control system. It is not sufficient to do the right thing. We must be seen to be doing the right thing. It is called demonstrated transparency and accountability. You don't come for me for an interview and say, oh God, I'm so passionate, I can work till death. Say, what is it that you have done before? Whether it's small or not is irrelevant. Can you demonstrate to me? Then, Being called does not mean we have all the skills required to lead, so please seek help when necessary. And like we've heard today, a lot of your members are willing to volunteer their services, world-class services, entirely for free. You only just need to ask. Demonstrate utilization of funds and involve members in doing so in order to build trust. And finally, be the light and set an example for society. I'm really hoping and looking forward to the activities of Cfaa leading to us setting a standard not only for the body of Christ, but for the entire. If it's good for the body of Christ, it must be good for society at large. Let's provide the example everybody has been looking for. I have this principle that guides me, and I want to recommend that. I have one very important question I ask myself always when I need to make decisions. I'll say, what will Jesus do? And I'm so convinced that when we talk about accountability and transparency and governance, Jesus will do the right thing, regardless of what anybody says or thinks. In closing, I have this quote that says, accountability is not only about what we do, but also what we fail to do, for which we are accountable. So if you refuse to do what you're supposed to do, you are failing in terms of accountability. Thank you very much for paying attention to me.